Vidhammer Fantasy.
Welcome back to Vidhammer. I'm Spudlow, bringing you another Vidhammer battle report. This one being the long-awaited final table battle from Crucible 3. I wasn't playing in this one because I didn't make it to the final table. As many of you probably know, I didn't win very many of my games, but oh well. This video shows you how a couple people play that actually know how to win some games. Tom brings his Dark Elves with a big block of witches and the Cauldron of Blood up against Grady's Demons of Chaos. He's got Epidemius and some other fun stuff out there, lots of Beasts of Nurgle and all that good stuff. And I'm going to turn it over to them at this point. You guys check it out.
I'm just calling the scenario this time Balls Out. It's a straight-up battle line with a bonus victory point for killing off each type of unit from your opponent's army. One for a Lord, one for a Hero, one for a Core, Special, and Rare, etc. For terrain elements, there's a charnel pit in the center, which they decide to play as difficult terrain and not impassable, as I did in the second round. A quick rundown of the army lists. Tom's playing the Dark Elves and has Crone Hellbrome with the Amulet of Darkfire. That gives a +4 bonus to dispel spells targeted at that unit. The Death Sword, which is Strength 10, and Cursed Blade, which is paired weapons. A Supreme Sorceress, level 4 with a Dispel Scroll, Talisman of Preservation that takes the Lore of Life. A Death Hag, BSB, on the Cauldron of Blood. It has Fury of Cain, which is the bound spell, gives the unit Frenzy for 1 turn. For his other elements, he has a block of 34 Witch Elves with the Razor Standard, a War Hydra, 3 Repeater Bolt Throwers, a unit of 5 Shades, a unit of 5 Doomfire Warlocks, 2 units of 5 Dark Riders, and 23 Executioners. His opponent Grady is playing the Demons of Chaos and has an Epidemius list. There's a Great Unclean one with 2 Greater Gifts, that's also a level 4 caster, the Herald of Nurgle BSB with 1 Greater Gift, 3 Plague Drones of Nurgle with the Plagued Proboscis, a Soul Grinder, 3 Beasts of Nurgle, 2 units that are a single Beast of Nurgle, then 2 units of 23 Plague Bearers of Nurgle, 2 Plague-Ridden Things, and a Lichborn Tenant. For spell generation, the demons end up with Rancid Visitations, Plague Wind, Miasma of Pestilence, and Curse of the Leper. For the Dark Elves, the Warlocks take Doombolt, as the Sorceress gets Dwellers Below, Throne of Vines, Earthblood, and Flesh to Stone. Dark Elves deploy first on the left side, and Tom starts with his Dark Rider units to the far ends of his line as Grady puts out some single Beasts of Nurgle. Tom follows with his Warlocks at the top, so Grady puts down his 3 Beast unit across from them. Then the big guns come out as Tom puts down his Witch Elves with the Cauldron of Blood. Over the next few placements, Grady puts down his Plague Bearer units up at the top of his line along with his remaining Beasts, as Tom surrounds his Cauldron with the Hydra, Executioners, and Bolt Throwers behind. Finally, it's characters, which you can guess as easily as I can. I know Epidemius goes in the upper Plague Bringers, and the Great Unclean one sits between them, doing a bit of a motorboat action, I guess. Tom has Crone in with the Witches, and his Sorceress with the Executioners. Finally, Tom scouts in his Shades and wins the first turn roll. The Dark Elves start off with some in-your-face fast cavalry action as the rest of the line angles toward the Plague Bearers. The first magic phase ends up 7 versus 5 as both sides manage a channel. The first 3 go for Throne of Vines on his Executioners, followed by 2 dice for Flesh to Stone on his Cauldron of Blood, and he gets double 6s, but avoids the miscast, giving them +4 to their toughness thanks to the Throne of Vines. His last 2 make an attempt at Earthblood, but Grady dispels this with his 5 dice. For shooting, the upper Dark Riders put a couple of wounds on one of his beasts, while the Bolt Throwers put 2 on the lone beast in the center. Then the Shades manage 1 on the lower beast unit as we move over to the demons. Grady moves his chaff up, but he doesn't want to offer a decent charge for Tom's bulk units, so he just turns his Plague Bringers for now, while he moves up the beast units to threaten some opposing chaff and the Bolt Throwers. Magic this time is 5 versus 3, and Grady uses all 5 for Plague Wind and gets Irresistible Force, and the resultant template makes its way into the charnel pit as the caster takes a wound from the backlash. Then in shooting, the Soul Grinder tries to lob a template onto the Hydra, but misfires and puts a wound on himself. Back to the Dark Elves, and Tom doesn't declare any charges. In fact, the Witches and Executioners don't move. But that doesn't stop the Fast Cow from running around and through and behind the demon line. Magic ends up 5 versus 3, and Tom uses all 5 to cast Dwellers Below on Grady's upper Plaguebringers with Irresistible Force. Grady's characters come out okay, but he loses 10 Plaguebringers out of 22. Tom avoids the miscast, and Grady goes ahead and uses his 3 dice to dispel to get rid of the Throne of Vines. Finally, they do the Plague Vortex's random movement, but he didn't pay postage and it goes right back at the guy who sent it. Then in shooting, the 3 bolt throwers are able to clear out the central lone beast of Nurgle. The Dark Riders and Shades take some shots as well, but they don't appear to do any damage. Now we see some combat as Grady charges his lower beast unit into the Shades, who stand and shoot. That'll be the only combat though. The rest of the Nurgle beasts move to flank and block, but Grady's battle line just mirrors Tom's, both players waiting for the right time to strike. Magic is 11 versus 7, and Grady uses 3 for something. Take a guess. The next 4 go for an attempt at Rancid Visitations on the Witches, but Tom dispels it with 4 of his dice. Finally, Grady uses his remaining 4 dice for Plague Wind, but doesn't get a high enough result, and Tom is able to dispel this with his remaining 3. For shooting, there's a shot from the Soul Grinder that goes towards the Cauldron and manages to wound, but the Cauldron saves it. Then it's into combat. The Shades fail to wound the Beast unit, which has some trouble getting hits of its own, but the Stomps come through, giving the Beast a large enough victory margin that the Shades fail the rerollable break test and get cut down when they flee, with the Beast overrunning into the lower bolt thrower. There's still no charging going into the 3rd turn. The main battle line continues on its course, though, with the upper Hydra being turned a bit towards the top to prevent a flank charge from the Plague Drones. The Warlocks and Dark Riders move around the single beast unit in an interesting chaff ballet. Magic is 8 versus 5, and Tom quickly uses the first 3 to put Throne of Vines on the Executioners. Then he uses his remaining 5 dice to attempt Flesh to Stone, and I assume it's on the Witch unit, but it's irrelevant as Grady gets an Irresistible Dispel for this one. On to shooting, where the lower Dark Riders fail to wound the single beast, but the upper Riders actually put 2 wounds on the Soul Grinder, and the 2 bolt throwers multi-shot into it as well, but leave it with a single wound remaining. For the only combat, the lower beast unit makes quick work of the bolt thrower, but elects to restrain so that it can reform and face the remaining. On the Demon's turn, the drones make the frontal charge on the Hydra, while the single beast goes after the Warlocks, and the lower left beast unit continues its Bolt-Hater rampage. The rest of Grady's battle line takes a step back, still trying to make the potential charge distance just a little less likely. Winds of Magic is 6 versus 4, and the unengaged Dark Elf units have to make some tests, which only the lower Dark Riders fail, taking them down by 2. Grady uses his first 3 dice for a Curse of the Leper to increase the drone's toughness by 3. The last 3 go for another shot at Plague Wind, but Tom dispels this one with his dice. For shooting, the Soul Grinder gets another hit, but I don't see any wounds ending up on the Cauldron, so it probably is saved. Then combat, where the single beast gets messed up by Warlocks and crumbles in combat resolution, with the Warlocks turning all the way around to face the lower beast unit and watch as it trounces another bolt thrower. In the upper combat, the Hydra rolls good on hits, but doesn't manage to wound the toughened up drones. The Hydra takes 2 wounds in return, but does manage to pass the break test. On the 4th turn, Tom goes for the Witch Elves charge on the lower Plaguebringers, but thanks to the little step backwards last round, the Witches end up failing the distance. The Executioners, however, get the auto-charge on the drone flank, and the Warlocks make it into the flank of the lower beast as the Dark Riders trot around and look important. Magic is 8 versus 5. Tom uses his first 2 dice for Flesh to Stone on the Executioners that would bring them to Toughness 7, but Grady dispels this with 3 of his dice. Tom uses his remaining 6 dice for Dwellers on Grady's upper Plaguebringers and kills off 3 rank-and-file models, but the characters manage to pass their tests. In shooting, neither Dark Rider unit manages to score any wounds, and we move into combat starting with the lower multi-fight. The Warlocks manage to put 2 wounds on the beasts, who only take out a single Warlock thanks to the flanking, but the other beasts are able to kill off the Bolt Thrower. The combat ends up close, but I think the Demons lose and might suffer a wound in combat res, but they do end up making the reform to face the Warlocks. In the upper combat, the Executioners end up just outside of the Cauldron's influence and only manage to put a single wound on the Toughness 7 drones. The Hydra manages to score a couple more before it dies in the return attacks. Despite taking the Hydra down, the drones lose the combat and suffer enough in resolution to take them down to the last model. At the bottom of 4, the Demons charge into the Witch Elves as their only real movement. Magic ends up 8 versus 5, and Grady uses his first 4 dice for a Curse of the Leper on the Plaguebringers, but Tom dispels this with all of his dice. So Grady uses the last 2 for Miasma on the Witches and lower their initiative and weapon skill by 2. In true Vidhammer style, the Soul Grinder goes for a shot and gets a misfire, and it's enough to finish it off. For combat, the Warlocks lose a couple more to the beasts, but manage to pass the break test and stay for another round. Then in the big combat, the Great Unclean One takes 3 wounds from Crone. Then the Witch Elves deal out a slew of attacks that end up doing 8 wounds after the saves. There's also the attacks from the Cauldron that do a couple more. The Plaguebringers only manage to score 3 wounds in return, and even though the Unclean One adds a couple as well, it's not enough to win the combat, and both of the Demons' units roll high on Instability test, causing another 7 Plaguebringers to die, and sends the Unclean One to wash his hands. For the final combat, the lone Plague Drone takes a wound and gives a wound, but after ranks and banners, it loses by enough to die in resolution. For the 5th turn, the Executioners don't declare a charge so that Tom can move his caster out of the unit for safety. Then for magic, it's 9 versus 6. The first 3 being used to bring Throne of Vines back into play. The next 3 go for Flesh to Stone, but it gets dispelled with 6 just to make sure it doesn't go through. Finally, Tom tries for Dwellers with his last 3, but the spell fails. Shooting is brought to you by Iron Maiden, England, 2013. I don't think there were any wounds, though. In combat, it looks like the level 4 Sorceress goes down, but not in a good way. The Witch Elves manage to kill off almost all of the Plaguebringers, so they only lose a single model in return attacks, and the rest of the Demon unit crumbles in resolution, with the Witches reforming for another round. In the other combat, the drones manage to finish off the Warlocks as we head over to the Demon side. Grady takes a short turn as he moves Epidemius out of the upper Plaguebringers, and his lower beasts try for the Hail Mary charge on the lone caster, but it doesn't go off. There's a magic phase though, just no spells are cast. At the top of the final turn, the Witches charge the few remaining Plaguebringers as the Executioners reform to face Epidemius, with Tom's lone caster moving into the unit and taking position on the safe side. The Dark Riders run around everything for the inevitable shots on Epidemius as well. Magic this time is 9 versus 5, and Tom uses the first 3 for Earthblood on the Executioners, which Grady dispels. Then the remaining unchecked dice put Flesh to Stone on them instead. Then the Dark Riders fired Epidemius, but failed to wound. And finally, there's a single combat. There's still a lot of Witches and the Cauldron, and there aren't very many Plaguebringers. But that's okay, because after another onslaught from the Witches, none of the Plaguebringers survive to strike back, catapulting us into the bottom of turn 6. Grady has 2 remaining units charge the Executioners, cause you might as well go out in a blaze of glory, and they both manage to make the distance. Magic and shooting are non-events, and in combat, Grady manages to do 3 wounds and only takes 1 in return thanks to the regen. He wins the combat by enough to leave Tom needing a 6 to stick, and he makes it. So that's the end of 6, and the Dark Elves walk away with a decisive victory for this one. Since the new Dark Elf book has come out, I've played against the Cauldron of Witches 2 times. Both times I elected to avoid the unit entirely for the whole game. After seeing the results of this matchup, I have to say, I don't plan on altering my strategy in the slightest. Some additional insights on that final charge of Epidemius, which happened mainly because he has Killing Blow even for the additional Nurglings, and Grady was hoping to get one on the Sorceress for some last-minute points. And Tom's Witches actually had to roll to restrain from the charge on a -5 from the Charnel Pit and the Cauldron's effects, and he made them every time. Thanks for watching this battle report. Be sure and check back for new videos each week. Do me a favor and subscribe, like the video if you want to see more, and check it out on Facebook and Twitter as well. Feel free to leave a comment or send a message if you have any tactics or matchups you'd like to see. Till next time from Vidhammer, keep fighting.